What's up, Previews World? Troy Jeffrey Allen here with PreviewsWorld.com and everything Previews World, pretty much. I got two special guests on this week, and we're going to talk about, I was about to say serial killers, but technically, I found out that Ed Gein is not a serial killer, and then we might get into that a little bit. But Ed Gein has inspired, of course, a lot of stories about serial killers, from Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Psycho to Silence of the Lambs. And there's a new book called "Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done?" And we're going to talk to the creators of this book. First up, Eric Powell. You know him from, of course, books like The Goon and Albatross Funny Books. And we also have Harold Schechter, novelist. How you guys doing?
Good, good. Thanks for having us.
No, thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate this. So, look, I'm a movie nerd. So I've heard Ed Gein's name a million times when it comes to some of the probably the most well-known horror films the last several years. But I want to ask you guys first off, like the character, of course, the actual history of Ed Gein. He clearly has fascinated people, not just in America, but across the world. And I want to ask you, what is the fascination with him, you think? Like, what is so captivating about his story? And you can start things off, Eric. What do you got?
I don't know. I can only speak for me personally that that kind of boogeyman persona that the guy took over in the 50s kind of, obviously has continued on till today. And even when I was a kid, he was a topic of conversation in, my school in the middle of Tennessee. So he has definitely penetrated the psyche of America for sure.
What about you, Harold? What do you think is the fascination with Ed Gein?
Well, somebody in an interview asked me recently what other American murderers were like Ed Gein. And I said there are none. I mean, Gein was really, really unique in the history of American crime. From the moment his crimes were discovered, Life magazine, which at that time was basically like every middle-class household in America read it or subscribed to it, ran 12 full pages on the crime when it was discovered. And, it's like some supernatural monster was living in this tiny Midwestern town in the middle of America's heartland during the Eisenhower era, which was supposedly this very bland, happy days time. So, and again, it turned out that there was this sort of mild-mannered, somewhat simple-minded farmer who was secretly, again, leading the life of some horror movie monster. It's one of the reasons his story has lent itself to being made into all these horror movies.
How did you two link up? Like, Harold, you come from the world of novels. Like, Eric, you are, you've done tons of comics, but like, how did you two find each other, and how did you find common ground on this project?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Harold's, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks while I work, and I've gone through everything that Harold has ever done at least a couple of times. While working. I love how he approaches the subject matter. Very matter of fact. I like the analogies that he makes in his work, and comparisons to the modern day situations. So I was very much familiar with him and his body of work. I was driving through Wisconsin, through a pretty desolate area, and had the idea of wouldn't it be interesting if you did a comic or a graphic novel of Ed Gein in the isolation that he lived in, because that's kind of the, it's the part that we have to, imagine the most, because they're the only thing, the only person who knew what was going on in that house was Ed Gein. Being aware of Harold's work and knowing his book Deviant very well, I thought, there's no way I could do anything as good as what Harold has already done. So what's the point? So a couple of weeks went by, and I had the idea, well, maybe I'll reach out and see if he would be interested in collaborating, because surely in the time since he's written it, he's probably, come across more information. Uh, but I didn't know what his opinion of the comic book genre was, so I didn't have high hopes that he was going to respond. But I was very happy to find out he's a huge comic book fan, and we've had several discussions about old comics and artists, and um, so he actually was super excited about it, and we kind of went from there.
Oh, awesome. Actually, I'm glad you lobbed it up for me because Harold, you've written books like Deviant, you've written Hell's Princess, The Killer Files, but this is like your first comic book. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How's that experience been?
It's been great. As Eric said, lifelong comic book fan. And I had a huge collection of Silver Age Marvel comics, and I've actually written about comics. So, and I consider Eric one of, if not the greatest comic book artists of our time. So when he approached me, I was thrilled. Also a fan of the graphic novel genre. It's been great. And the collaboration has been a total delight, especially since Eric has done most of the work. It's always good to have a collaborator who does most of the work. It's been terrific. I'm incredibly excited to see the book.
Actually, so this one is for both of you, but I'll go in order here. How does this get inside the head of Ed Gein? Like, actually, do we want to get inside the head of Ed Gein? Like, how does this work? And I'll let you go first, Harold. Like, can you elaborate a little bit?
Even though I've written a number of novels, mostly I am known for and have written historical true crime, going back 30 years now. And when I write those books, I mean, part of the challenge for me is to try to get inside the head of the subjects I'm writing about, which sometimes means going to some very dark places in my own psyche so I can kind of empathize with them. On occasion, that's been a very discomforting kind of process. Anyway, when I wrote Deviant, which was my first historical true crime book, I went out to Plainfield, interviewed people who had known Gein. I did a lot of firsthand research, which I do for all my books. I read a lot of psychiatric reports. So part of that, was trying to get into the mentality of Gein. And one of the things I'm very proud of with the book that Eric and I have produced is that I think we really managed to do that. And over the years, my thinking about Gein and his psychology has kind of changed a little, because I've continued to give it a lot of thought. And as I said, I mean, Eric, I think, has done a brilliant job of visualizing some of the psychopathological aspects of Gein that I've come to believe partly account for his actions.
And what about you, Eric? How do you get inside the head of Ed Gein, especially visually? Like, that's got to be quite something.
I don't know if there's a way to answer that correctly with that. I mean, it's just, you just have to. It kind of reminds me of Manhunter, or the
Mindhunter.
The Thomas Harris movie. Manhunter is based on. What's that based on? What's the name of the novel?
It's based on Red Dragon.
Red Dragon, yeah,
that's right.
So he, the detective in that, they kind of say, well, why is he so good? Well, he can put himself into the mind of this person or whatever. And I think any artist or writer that's working on some kind of deranged character, whether it's fictional or real, has to be able to imagine that what it's like to live in that person's shoes a little bit, even if you don't sympathize with them or really have anything in common with them. You still have to have be somewhat empathetic to their situation and understand, their bizarre reasoning for the things that they do. Luckily for me, working with Harold on this, I mean, I feel like he had such a great perspective and an original perspective on what was causing this guy to do these things that it really set off my imagination, and it made it really easy for me to visualize this stuff.
Now, Harold, you talked a little bit already about the research you did on this. I'm actually curious still from both of you, like how far down the rabbit hole does this go? Like, like there's a video floating online that's actually completely fake of Ed Gein's house, and so like, I guess kind of like discerning like fact from fiction, speculation from fiction, and all the stuff that just kind of came from like Hollywood on top of that. Like, how do you how does your research process work? And I'll start with you, Harold.
I base my books on primary source material. I do my own original research. In the case of Gein, and this was going back again to the late 1980s. So, there was no access to the internet or anything like that. So I went to Wisconsin, did a lot of research in various libraries, in the courthouse where Gein was tried. I spoke to people who were very involved in the case, including psychiatrists who had examined him. I went to, as I said, Plainfield, and I was lucky enough, before I went to Plainfield, I was told that, people there were very, very reluctant, even then, to discuss the case, because there were still, people who were contemporaries of Gein. And, Gein had inflicted this terrible psychological trauma on the town. But I was lucky enough to make a contact with someone who gave me some connections to various people who had known Gein.
Oh, wow.
Who were very, very hospitable to me. So, yeah, it's a matter of collecting all the firsthand material, psychiatric reports, of course, all the newspaper articles, which at that time I couldn't get online. Probably some of them you can't even get online now. So, before I even began writing, I had assembled, I don't know, 1,000 pages of research material, including, again, my own interviews and so on and so forth. And one of the things that interested me about the case was exactly separating fact from fiction. And all, one of the things I was interested in was how the Gein story was turned into a myth in the movies and in other ways. So, in order to explore that, I had to really establish, insofar as I was able to, the facts of the case before I could determine what was folklore that rose up after it.
What about you, Eric? Like, how far down the rabbit hole does your research go, especially on the visual side? Like, I mean, did you find some really gnarly stuff that you had to depict, or was it like how did you go about that?
I was pretty careful about what we depicted visually. We both had in mind the type of book we wanted to do, and there's been enough of it. Exploitive kind of gore fests done about this case. I wanted it, specifically in the art to kind of convey a little bit more of a serious take with the visuals. So I did a lot of visual research though, and so much so that I was like, I was magazines that he had in his house that I had found by one of them. I was pretty proud of myself that I found it. I just saw a little corner of a magazine and couldn't find that cover until I realized that it was only half a cover, that part of it had been ripped off, and it was an ad behind it that was actually seen. And I was actually able to track down that magazine.
Oh wow.
And I also did a kind of a map of his house, based on the few crime scene photos. There were no crime scene photos of the upstairs, so I couldn't really, just had to invent that. But based on the wallpaper patterns and the windows from, the outside of the house and inside, the arrangement, I was able to kind of piece together the layout of the house. So I went pretty far down the rabbit hole. A few times I had to stop myself because I was looking for things, and then realized there was no way possible that they would ever even end up in the book. So I was just wasting time trying to find stuff. But yeah, it's crazy how much you can just get obsessed with this stuff and dig and dig and dig, fruitlessly sometimes.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, guys, for hanging out with me for a little bit and talking about your book. I want to let people know that Did You Hear What Eddie Gein Done is in comic shops August 4th. And this is an in-depth exploration of the Gein family and what led to the creation of the Necrophile, who haunted the dreams of 1950s America, inspired such films, like I mentioned before, as Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. If you have not pre-ordered your copy yet, and if you haven't taken part of the Kickstarter, then you have a second chance, and that's through Previous World Pull Box. So definitely sign up for Previous World Pull Box. Let your local comic shop know that you want a copy of this book, and and just hold on until August 4th, which actually isn't that far away. So that's actually kind of nice, right? Again, I want to thank Eric and I want to thank Harold for joining me, talking a little bit about I guess what would probably America's favorite serial killer. And this has been Previews World. And thanks for joining me, and I will catch you guys later.